Hello there folks, I'm Dan Brown from sortofinteresting.com and today you're joining me on board good old Narrowboat Able Zach for a few tips and a chat about a few things to look out for if you're considering going to view a narrowboat to buy. So just a little bit of background on little Dan Brown here. I've bought 2 narrowboats and sold one, so I've got some general knowledge of this sort of area, but I would in no way, shape or form say that I'm an expert or anything like that, or that these are absolute hard and fast rules that you've got to stick by. It's just a few things from my experience that I wanted to share with you. So without further ado, I'm going to sit down and get comfortable. We're going to get some footage up on the screen of some boats and stuff and get stuck into actually talking about buying a boat. Right, my friends, we're going to dive straight in at the deep end here, excuse the pun, with one of the most significant things that you should consider if you're looking at a narrowboat and thinking about making an offer on it. And that is, what is the condition of the hull like below the waterline? Now, if you picture a narrowboat as being nothing more than a steel tube that's floating around in some muddy water, potentially for years at a time, and decades maybe, you can start to get an appreciation as to why it may be a concern of yours to think, what's that metal actually like that's been submerged in water for 20 years, almost unbroken, for example. So the only way that you can be really confident that you've got some good information on what the condition of the hull is like is with a hull survey, which you would want to get a third-party, independent, completely impartial person to come along, physically get the boat out of the water, do ultrasound tests and have a once-over of it, so they could then give you a report telling you what the metal thickness is like and if there's any serious pitting in the metal that you might need to worry about. Things of that nature. So it might surprise some people that it's the actual potential buyer who's expected to pay for that in most cases. And the idea is that you want it to be impartial. You wouldn't say, for example, if you turned up on a boat that someone was trying to sell you, and some random person's there going, "Oh, I got this hull survey done," and it's just a handwritten note that just says, "Dear potential buyer, this hull is in perfect condition. Yours sincerely, a boat surveyor." Obviously, there's potential mischief afoot here, so you'd always want somebody independent and impartial to do that. So that's the first thing I'll say. And I would say, as I can't stress this enough, always get a hull survey done. Now, the fact that I haven't had a hull survey done on either of my boats before I've bought them says more about me than it does about the general video and the advice I'm giving to you. As basically, especially on the second boat, as part of me getting this boat at a ridiculously low price, it was a quick sale. So I saved thousands of pounds on the asking price, but ultimately I've taken on that risk that when the boat comes out of the water, it might need thousands of pounds spending down below to put a little bit of new steel on it here or there. And that's something that we'll talk about in another video, because there's loads of boat jobs that can be very, very expensive. But we don't want to worry you too much before you've even got a boat just yet. Now, it's very tempting to look around at boats that are for sale and see a boat that might be 10 years old and assume that's going to be in better condition than a boat that's maybe 20 years old. Now, there's a couple of things that might... it's important to sort of get any complacency out of the way here and not think in those sort of terms necessarily. Because you might think, oh yeah, it's only 10 years old. But if that boat's been out and about cruising up and down a canal like the Llangollen, the top end behind me is really shallow and it's got a concrete base at certain parts, and when the water's clear over the winter months, you can literally see the scrape marks along the base of the canal where boats have scraped up and down it, and it's something that people have certain worries about, especially in this area, with purchasing ex-hire boats that might have been going up and down the Llangollen Canal for years, scraping all over the place and rubbing away little microscopic bits of metal over the years, piece by piece. So again, something like that, if you've got a younger boat that's been out and about for years and years, compared to an older boat that's been sat at the side of the canal in relative peace and harmony, then apart from the natural rusting and things like that and degradation of the metal, your hulls are not necessarily, well, newer is always better, older is always worse. And something with even newer boats, and this isn't by any stretch of the imagination a universal trait, but a lot of people have told me who work in boats, and a lot of people who work in other industries say that a lot of modern steel supplies are very poor quality compared to what they used to be like a couple of decades earlier. So there's some people who will be sat on brand new boats maybe, who might find that they have to do more work on their hull a lot sooner than people have done in years gone past. And again, there's so many layers to this that you could do a video just talking about these sorts of technicalities. But we're 5 minutes and we haven't moved off hulls yet, so we're going to speed this video up. So another key element of a narrowboat is likely to be its engine. Now this is where you venture more into similarities with buying a car or a vehicle than buying a house or a traditional home. And same rules apply. If you have a look under the deck boards, if you don't know much about engines such as myself, then just have a look. Are there any obvious signs of things that you don't like the look of, like signs that stuff's been replaced or any potential overheating, anything like that? Is there any water dripping in from the outside of the boat through pipes that are going into the engine that might need attention? You would expect probably to see a few drips from the stern gland where the propeller shaft goes out into the actual canal with the propeller. But you wouldn't expect to see much, and on Abel's Ark there was no drips at all when I was first viewing it with a mind to buy it. So again, if there's a lot of water coming in through the propeller shaft, that might be a sign that either just the stern gland needs the grease handle turning, or that it actually needs repacking, which isn't necessarily a big or an expensive job, but it's just more hassle if you're already in the midst of trying to move on to a narrowboat from dry land or something like that. But again, things like that to think about. Also, because obviously narrowboat engines are propelling a craft up and down water, it's very difficult to measure that in mileage in terms of the engine. So you'll have things, instead of with a car being measured in how many thousand miles it's done, you'll have the actual runtime of how many hours the engine's been running. So once we get to the inside of the boat, there's a few things to think of here. Firstly, don't go in looking with an idea of trying to picture yourself living on it and idealising, oh yeah, I can see myself huddled up in front of the fire or anything like that. You want to go in with a ruthless, harsh, real pragmatic, practical eye. So you want to look around, you want to try the taps, check the water system's running and the water pump's okay, check the electric sockets are working, check the gas and the oven's okay. If people are on board with you to show you these things, then make sure you use the absolute, just see as many things in action as you can so that you get that proper idea. Yep, that's working, that's working, that's working. The last thing you want is to move on board and then find that there's no actual connection for the gas cooker through to the gas bottles or something ridiculous like that. Or you go to plug your phone into charge and the sockets don't work. So, of course, things like that you want to look at. Have a look at things like the fireplace. Is the chimney sealed well and stuff like that? Again, just simple things that you'd look at if you were looking at a house. So get all thoughts of the lifestyle out of your mind. Your first thoughts should be the very practical things. Another thing to look out for is any signs of damp. You can imagine boats that are out surrounded by water and down misty canals and very cold temperatures over the winter. If there's nobody living on board to keep the fire going, then it can get very damp and very cold on board. So again, look for any patches or signs of damp. Look for any potential swelling with the floorboards if it's got wooden floor, because you'll very often get below the floorboards a certain amount of water settled in the bottom of the boat, whether that's just condensation or whether that's something worse and it's leaking from the outside. So if you see signs of the floorboards ever potentially getting damp at either edge, then there might be a lot of water gathering down there. But again, stuff like that, you've just got to look around, think practically, think sensibly, and think very, very harshly. It's better to over-criticise than it is to say, oh, we can deal with that, until you've bought a boat, spent a fortune, and then got another fortune to spend doing jobs on board, just so that you could get out there, as I used to, and I did with my first boat. I was so excited to get onto the canals that I was just like, buy, quick, get me a boat! But anyway, moving swiftly on. Now, this is something that's a little more of a nebulous thing that I'm going to say here, and that is, don't be deceived by the looks. If a boat looks smart and all the rest of it, then that's great, but it's not necessarily a sign that the boat is all in good condition, if that makes sense. And I saw a good example of this in a marina recently, where a boat that was, I'm not sure how old, like 20 odd years old, I'm quite sure, and it looked not too bad. It was a bit tatty and a bit scraped paintwork and bits of rust, that sort of stuff. But just before it went up for sale, it got a complete makeover. Went in, got a complete paint job top to bottom, and was unbelievably tidy when it came out, and it looked absolutely perfect. Now that is a very superficial thing. Now admittedly it'll cost you a fortune to get a boat painted if you have it done with like a professional level, so it's got that mirror shine on the outside paintwork and stuff. However, obviously if somebody came to view that boat before the paintwork had been done, they might get that immediate face value impression of, oh, this is a bit tatty, oh, they haven't taken care of this, which is not necessarily true at all. If you see some boats that look a bit scruffy, that isn't a sign necessarily that that's a worse condition boat than a boat that's immaculate just up the canal. So then, obviously, that person who thought, oh, they haven't taken care of that, could come back in a week's time, see this boat in immaculate condition with perfect paintwork and think, flipping heck, they've taken good care of that, oh yeah, and it gives you that false sort of confidence in it. And that's something that goes for the inside too. If somebody's given the inside of the boat a quick lick of paint, that could be hiding up patches of damp for all you know. So it's another thing, it's a tricky thing to think of, but you've got to be more critical and have a very critical eye looking at some of these things, because you just don't know what's going on literally below the surface, even at paint level. Another good example, I think, is that if you look at my boats in the night time when I've got my lights on below the gunnels on the sides of the boat here, so it's got some nice simple LED strip lights on each side, and it looks great, and you can change them to whatever colour you want, and I really like the effect. They're not even stuck up properly, they've got brackets, they've got sticky pads, they've got all sorts holding them in place. But if you take that at face value when you see my boat in the evenings, it makes it look as if it's a little bit more fancy on board than it actually is. And that's the sort of thing, again, if you come in and it's all painted immaculately, that's effectively, again, your 20 quid, 30 quid you've spent on lighting that suddenly changes the entire feel of the place, but ultimately is a very superficial, very simple thing that can be done or undone in a second. Right then, my friends, I think it's time that I drew this video to a close, as it's already gone on for longer than I'd anticipated. Hope you've enjoyed this. Please do consider checking out my other boat life videos. I've got loads of boat life videos from when I lived on Narrowboat Tilly, and of course now we're on Abel's Ark. I've got loads of videos still to come about Narrowboat, Abel's Ark, and all the fun and games that I hope to have on board here. So do subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you're curious and want to help me out, please consider checking out my short books available for the Kindle. Find links to those in the description. If you want to help me out as well, please consider checking out my Patreon page. So that's a great help, and in return I'm releasing my current book that I've been working on completely free to everybody as an audiobook and as a written book. So I hope you'll enjoy that. If you don't want to use Patreon, that's absolutely fine, no worries. Anyway, please do check the links in the description. You'll find all that stuff, as well as me on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and Pinterest, all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, my friends, have an absolutely fantastic day. Keep it interesting, keep it boat worthy, and of course, my friends, farewell.